There are three major things that this country, those called Americans, should have stopped doing to indigenous Black Americans, and therefore the repercussions of their actions wouldn't be so great. One, they should have stopped systematically destroying the Black American family, then mocking the Black American family when the father was absent. Two, they should have systematically stopped unaliving Black American families or Black Americans, and then fabricating that our community is the most violent. Three, they should have stopped stealing those called Black Americans' financial wealth, intellectual property, physical property, and identity. Has anyone ever heard of the Weeping Time? It was, I don't know if it's still there today, but it was an exhibit that the Smithsonian Museum had in their African American, I'm gonna say Black American history and culture section. It documented U.S. history of separating children from their parents. This is a quotation. Night and day, you could hear men and women screaming, "Ma, pa, sister or brother, taken away without any warning." Susan Hamilton, a witness to a slave auction, recalled in a 1938 interview, "People was always dying from a broken heart." I'll be back. Hello everyone, welcome back. Those who have returned, whether you are a subscriber or not, welcome newcomers. Let's get on with this. Now, the purpose of this video is to talk about the plight of the Black American family. The group who was always derised, always made an example when it comes to something negative. So let's talk about the Black American family. You know how some people like to talk about two-parent families. Okay, let's talk about the state of the Black American family. And today what we're going to stop doing is not being accountable. And I'm not talking about Black Americans. I'm talking about situations that occurred to come in, destroy, divide, and annihilate the Black family. And then you sit back and be like, aha, pointing the finger, mocking, when there is a method to the reasons why the Black American family was destroyed, or they tried to destroy it. Listen to this. A report in the Maryland State Archives includes a narrative from a man named Charles Ball, who was enslaved as a child and remembered the day he was sold away from his mother. "My poor mother, when she saw me leaving her for the last time, ran after me, took me down from the horse, clasped me in her arms, and wept loudly and bitterly over me," Ball recalled. "My master seemed to pity her and endeavored to soothe her distress by telling her that he would be a good master to me and that I should not want anything." Ball added that when his mother's persisted, his master hit her with a rawhide whip. The weeping, as I stated initially in the video, the Weeping Time refers to the largest auction of enslaved people in U.S. history, which occurred on March the 2nd and 3rd, 1859 in Savannah, Georgia. During the 2-day sale, it rained so heavily that the event was named the weeping time by the enslaved people who saw the rain as God weeping for their suffering. The auction was held to pay off the gambling debts of enslaver Pierce Mies Butler, and it resulted in a brutal separation of over 400 families. So black men might not be, and women might not be separated from their families because of bondage, physical bondage, but there have been clever ways created to separate the father and the mother from the black family. The main one is incarceration. Second is poverty. Because when you're so damn poor and you're tired of being poor and you're tired of your children and wife or husband going to bed starving, stomach growling so hard you think it's eating itself, you go out there and find colorful ways to feed your family, even if it calls for you to do something illegal. Some enslavers did not feed the enslaved right. They didn't feed them appropriately. They didn't give them enough food to sustain. Especially if you had them working from sun up to sundown, that food is going to burn. It's going to burn through you like eating fruit. Like fruit glows through you real fast. It's designed to do that. But anyway, so they would have to steal. They would have to steal potatoes, chicken, just to sustain. Then you want to have them get up at the crack of morning to go work nonstop. So when they were still doing slavery, they were accused. They were treated like, hardcore criminals, neglecting the fact that they weren't fed appropriately. So we've always been stigmatized. Okay, let's go on. So the Weeping Time was the largest auction of enslaved people in U.S. history. It occurred March the 2nd and the 3rd, 1859 in Savannah, Georgia. The auction took place at the 10 Breck Race Course in Savannah, where 429 enslaved men, women, and children were sold. They had been brought from the Butler plantations and for a week were housed in a horse stable before the sale began. The name Weeping came from the continuous torrential rain that fell during the auction and stopped when the final person was sold. It also refers to the tears of the families being torn apart. Now, that was supernatural. It really stopped when the last person was sold. Didn't you guys see the warnings? Let's go on. The cause. The auction was ordered to settle the massive gambling debts of the enslaver Pierce Mies Butler, who was the grandson of a U.S. Constitution signer. Privilege, huh? The aftermath. The sale broke up hundreds of families, many of whom had lived and worked together on the same plantation for their entire lives. The event deepened the divisions between the North and the South, and its memory has been preserved through historical markers, oral histories, and books like Anne C. Bailey's The Weeping Time Memory and the largest slave auction in American history. Now that I gave a little background information on how they basically just chipped away and destroyed the black family. It was no such thing. They broke these people's hearts because they knew that once they separated them, they would never see each other again. So imagine that. Okay, now let's go into what they did after slavery to attack the black family. When their parents weren't available, what did the children do? They ran amok. Okay, now let's discuss how black women were literally forced to go to work, leave their families. Their husbands were working in the military, and they were making or earning enough money to take care of their entire family. So the black women didn't need to work. They were fine staying at home taking care of them babies. So white women were asking the black women to work for them, and the black women were like, no thank you, I'm a stay-at-home wife. They were offended, like, how dare you? And they actually came up with laws to force the black woman to leave home and man their homes and take care of their babies while the black woman and the husband were out of the house. So you see how that deteriorated the family structure? And then the federal government refused to protect black workers. I will explain a little bit before we go into this brief history of how America destroyed the black American family. Check this out. It was called occupational segregation. Federal labor policies in the 1930s, such as the Fair Labor Standards Act, deliberately excluded domestic and agricultural workers from basic protections like minimum wage and overtime, a concession to Southern lawmakers that disproportionately affected black women. In 1920, 87% of black women workers were still in these low-paying fields. Regardless of whether they want to or have to, able-bodied Negro women in Greensville who are not regularly employed are to be put to work, put in jail, or fined heavily. At a special meeting yesterday afternoon, City Council discussed the situation with regard to this class of loafers at some length, and it seemed that all members of council were agreed that steps should be taken to compel them to engage in some useful occupation. It was decided that an ordinance similar to the one now in force requiring all able-bodied men to work at least 5 days per week should be passed with regard to these women. So if they refuse to go to work, they wanted them to have gainful employment, even though being a housewife and a stay-at-home mother is a job done out of love. They wanted to force these women to go into these white homes and take care of these white families, right? If they refuse, they put them in jail. You see the irony? You put them in jail, what are they going to do? Just sit there and think about their decisions? Here, I'm going to read the ordinance. City ordinance soon to be passed requiring them to be regularly employed. They had many complaints about black women refusing to work in white homes for white families because they were taking care of their own families. Such an ordinance will be prepared and voted on at the next regular meeting of council. A number of complaints have come to members of members of council of Negro women who are not at work and who refuse employment when it's first offered them. The result being that it is exceedingly difficult for families who need cooks and laundresses to get them. Wives of colored soldiers getting a monthly allowance from the government have a number of them declined to work on the ground that they can get along without working, according to reports. Others have flatly refused jobs without giving any reason whatever, while still others pretend that they are employed when, as a matter of fact, they derive a living from illegitimate means. I would love to know what those illegitimate means were. Not taking care of a white family. Let's continue. The proposed ordinance will require them all to carry a labor identification card showing that they are regularly and usefully employed, and the labor inspectors and police will be charged with the duty of rigidly enforcing the law. I don't really have too much to say on that because just the thought burns me. That if a black woman wasn't working for you, wasn't slaving in your kitchen, washing your nasty, dirty underwear and clothes, feeding your children, she didn't have a legitimate job. You see how it flipped, where they was forcing black folks and black women to work. Now, you see what they do with these jobs now. Instead of giving it to an American black person, what would they do? Open the border and give it to a subservient immigrant. Let's be real. We're the only group that stands up against racists in their face. While you guys come over here, you're just thankful to have a job. So you don't live in extreme poverty anymore. So of course you're not going to stand up and confront these people, because you don't want to go back to your country and drown in poverty. Let's continue. Just 100 years ago, black women were forced to work. On a recent trip to South Carolina, where it was 100 degrees with nearly matching humidity, I thought about my ancestors who were kidnapped and enslaved and worked on plantations for centuries in that effing heat. Kidnapped? No, we were snatched off our own land. And that's what they've been trying to hide for centuries. But watch what happens. Even after abolition, I came across a Greenville news article from October 1918 stating the Negro woman to be put to work during World War I. Black women were stay-at-home moms while their husbands served. This was unacceptable to white families who needed housekeepers and nannies for their families. The city council enacted an ordinance demanding that black women become employed, go to jail, or pay fines. And then they have the nerves to say, what, pay for what? Reparations for what? It's not just for slavery. It's for every foul, disgusting thing you did after slavery as well. Now let's talk about, or let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's talk about how racism intentionally destroyed the Black American family. This is the untold story of the deliberate dismantling of the Black family in America through systemic racism. We expose the policies designed to incarcerate Black men at alarming rates, leaving a devastating impact on generations. At the peak of mass incarceration, studies projected that 1 in 3 Black men born in the U.S. could expect to be imprisoned in their lifetime. Think about that. While more recent data shows the risk has thankfully decreased, the damage from that era was done. It's the result of quiet, century-long war waged not on a foreign enemy, but a domestic one. The Black American family. How did we get here? How did a community that survived the unimaginable cruelty of slavery emerge into freedom only to see its most fundamental institution systemically dismantled? This is the story of how policy, not culture, was used to break the Black family. The myth versus the reality. When we talk about challenges in the Black community today, poverty, crime, education, the conversation often shifts, sometimes subtly, sometimes not, to the breakdown of the family unit. For decades, the narrative has been pushed that this is some kind of a cultural failing. But that narrative is a lie. It's a convenient story that covers up a devastating historical truth. The instability of the Black family isn't the cause of racial inequality. It's a consequence of it. I was looking at a TikTok or a clip of a TikTok video. And this woman made a great point. She said, why is it that every time, a Black male goes out and commit a crime, his actions are always blamed on, maybe he just being raised by a single mother? She said, but when we have mass shootings, why isn't the single white mother blamed? And I'm going to go so far as to say, why isn't the white family blamed? Period. Let's go on. Here's the fact that shatters the whole myth. Black families were incredibly stable during the brutal oppression of the Jim Crow era. At a time of legalized segregation, lynchings, and open violent racism, the two-parent Black household was the norm. In the early 20th century, Black marriage rates were high, nearly on par with their white counterparts. This wasn't because life was better. It was because the family was a fortress, a source of resilience, and the main institution for survival. So if the black family was a pillar of strength, even under the boot of Jim Crow, what changed? The attacks became more insidious, more structural, and far more effective. The destruction was no longer just about terror. It was about policy. To understand this demolition, you have to follow the money. After slavery, the family was the bedrock of black economic dreams. But you can't build wealth if you can't own property. And starting in the 1930s, the federal government began a policy that would lock black families out of the single greatest engine of wealth creation in the American history: home ownership. It was called redlining. The government, through the Homeowners Loan Corporation, created color-coded maps of American cities. White neighborhoods were colored green and labeled desirable. Black neighborhoods were colored red, deemed hazardous, making it nearly impossible for black families to get federally backed mortgages. Following the government's lead, banks refused to lend black people in red line areas, while racist real estate agents blocked them from buying anywhere else. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was a policy that strangled opportunity at its source. While white families were building generations of wealth through home equity, black families were trapped in a cycle of renting or forced into predatory contracts designed to fail. This systemic theft of economic potential put immense strain on the black family. It denied black men the ability to be stable providers, a cornerstone of the family structure at that time, and created a permanent economic underclass where families lived on a financial knife's edge. This economic marginalization was a deliberate choice. It ensured that black communities remained segregated, under-resourced, and unable to build the capital needed to survive the next assault. I used to always wonder, before the internet and before, we were able to connect with mass information just at the tip of our fingertips. I used to always wonder, why is it that it seemed like so many white people owned homes? They made it like a big deal. And why so many few black people own homes? People who refuse to wake up and see the truth when you're forced to see the truth, God have mercy on your soul. Now, let's talk about the new Jim Crow: mass incarceration. The civil rights movement of the 1960s tore down the legal framework of Jim Crow. I was told that the Civil Rights Act was titled American Indian Civil Rights Act, and the Indians they were referring to is us, those called Black Americans. That's why after the Civil Rights Act, they started calling us black. You got to do some research, folks. Let's go on. But the system of racial control didn't just disappear, it evolved. It found a new, quieter language: law and order. In the 70s, President Nixon declared a war on drugs. Years later, a top Nixon aide, John L. Richmond, admitted the chilling truth behind it. He said, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the blacks with heroin and then criminalize them both heavily, we can disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news." Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. When I tell you about intentionally stigmatizing us, associating us with everything negative, like they force-fed us The crack our community was heavily involved and being crack addicts. And then later on, years later, I find out that our people weren't the crack addicts. Oh, this country is viciously evil. This was the birth of the mass incarceration era. Policies like mandatory minimums and the infamous 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine weren't designed to fight crime. They were designed to target black communities. Crack, cheaper and more available in the inner cities, carried a sentence 100 times harsher than the chemically identical powder cocaine, which was more common in the white suburbs. The results were catastrophic. An entire generation of black men were swept into the prison system, often for low-level, non-violent drug offenses. Police disproportionately patrolled black neighborhoods, leading to far higher arrest rates for the same behaviors that went ignored in white areas. Once in the system, the bias continued. Studies have repeatedly shown that black men receive larger and harsher sentences than white men for the exact same crimes. It becomes a devastating, efficient machine for removing black men from their families and communities. The generational fallout. The absence of millions of black men didn't happen in a vacuum. It created a crater in the heart of the black family. The most immediate impact was the skyrocketing number of single-parent households. Today, about 64% of black children are raised in single-parent homes, a figure directly linked to the era of mass incarceration. When a father is removed, the family's income can plummet, plunging them into poverty. But the damage goes far beyond money. For a child, a parent's incarceration is a profound trauma. It leads to higher rates of behavioral issues, struggles in school, and greater chance that they themselves will end up in the criminal justice system. The cycle repeats. And even when a father is released, the punishment isn't over. A criminal record becomes a lifelong barrier to finding a job, securing housing, or even getting an educational loan. The Redlining Center for Justice found that a prison sentence can cut a person's lifetime earnings by more than $500,000. This doesn't just destabilize one person, it destabilizes the entire family unit for generations. Research has shown that having a family member incarcerated can slash a household net worth by nearly 2/3. This is how you systematically dismantle a community from the inside out. Understanding this history isn't about placing blame, it's about recognizing the system. It's about seeing the clear lines connecting the redline maps of the 1930s to the sentencing disparities of the 1980s and the consequences we see today. The challenges facing the black family aren't a cultural mystery. They are the predictable result of decades of intentional policy. Now let's talk about the systemic murdering of black people in America. Whips, nooses, and badges, the evolution of American murder. From the shadow of a lynching tree to the glare of squad car lights, from the crack of a whip on a plantation to the crack of a firearm on a city street. For centuries in America, the tools of racial murder have changed. The excuses have been rewritten. The perpetrators have swapped hoods for uniforms. But has the terror ever really stopped? This is the story of an unbroken line of violence, tracing how the whip, the noose, and the badge became connected instruments in a systemic war on black lives, a war that has evolved but never ended. To understand American murder, you have to start where the country started, with slavery. For 250 years, violence against black people wasn't just tolerated, it was the law. It was the engine of the economy. The entire system was built on the legal fiction that black people weren't people at all. They were property. The property could be controlled, disciplined, and destroyed however the owner saw fit. The whip is the most famous symbol of this era, but the tools of control were endlessly horrific. Brandings, mutilation, and casual killings were all just a part of daily life on a plantation. This violence wasn't random, it was systemic, and it was carried out by an institution that many see as the origin point of American policing, the slave patrol. Starting in the Carolinas in the early 1700s, slave patrols were basically organized groups of white citizens empowered to terrorize and control the enslaved population. Their mission was clear: crush uprisings, instill fear, and hunt down anyone who dared to run for freedom. Now that challenges everything you guys said about slavery was not that bad. Let's go on. They could stop, search, and brutalize any black person with total impunity, all backed by laws that strip black people of any human rights. Patrollers even took oaths, swearing to discharge the trust reposed in me as the law directs. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about creating a permanent racial hierarchy where white authority was absolute and black life had no value. The violence of slavery did more than build an economy. It embedded the ideas of black criminality and white supremacy deep into the nation's DNA. It created the blueprint for racial control, a legacy that would long outlive slavery itself. All those people that look like me, or some of them are black immigrants, but I'm talking about those who are indigenous to this country, who look like me, and you're on platforms speaking down on us, you're going to get it worse. You're going to get it worse than the white races. All those things you let spew out your mouth, those are life and death. Those words are life and death. Let's go on. The reign of the noose. When the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment formally abolished slavery, the system of control had to adapt. Emancipation wasn't met with healing, but with a new and arguably more visible form of terror. The whip of the overseer was replaced by the noose of the lynch mob. From the end of the Reconstruction all the way into the mid-20th century, America fell into an epidemic of racial terror lynchings. The exact numbers are hard to know since so many killings were unrecorded. But we know that between 1877 and 1950, and I will add currently today, more than 4,000 black Americans were lynched in the United States. In states like Mississippi and Georgia, the numbers were staggering, with over 500 documented lynchings in each. And those were just the cases we know about. This wasn't frontier justice. Lynching was a calculated tool used to enforce white supremacy and put the old racial hierarchy back in place. It was a public spectacle. These weren't hidden acts of shame. They were carnival-like events, sometimes attended by thousands of white citizens, including women and children. Newspapers would announce upcoming lynchings, and photographers sold pictures of the victims as postcards. And I did a video a few weeks ago exposing what lynchings really were about. They were about sacrifices. And yeah, you should check that video out. Let's go on. The alleged crimes that set off these murders were often minor or completely made up, while the accusations of assaulting a white woman was a common excuse. The data shows that less than a quarter of lynchings were even related to such a claim. More often, black men, women, and children were murdered for breaking some unspoken racial rule, for being too successful, for demanding respect, for no reason at all. It sent a clear message to every black person in the community. Step out of line and this could be you. And state was complicit. Law enforcement often participated in lynchings or simply stepped aside to let the mobs do their work. In the long, bloody history of this era, it's almost impossible to find an example of a white person convicted for murdering a black person in a lynching. This sent a clear signal. Murdering black people wasn't a crime to be punished, but a social ritual to be celebrated. This terror fueled the Great Migration as millions of black Americans fled the South searching for safety, and it created a culture of fear that would enforce Jim Crow for decades. And there's a video on TikTok talking about a black man was found on a golf course hanging from a tree. I think it was in Wisconsin. I forgot exactly what state. It was a white woman who did the video, and she said black men do not lynch themselves in trees or hang themselves in trees. And then in the comments, we were saying that we think the perpetrator are law enforcement agents, and let me tell you why. What group can drive around aimlessly for hours on hours any day and night without anyone suspecting a thing? The police, law enforcement. So wouldn't they be the greatest cover to do these heinous, evil, wicked things to black men? Let's go. The shift to systemic oppression. Eventually, the era of public lynchings began to fade. It wasn't because of a moral awakening. It was because the terror had worked. The threat of murder was now so deeply woven into society that it didn't need to be a weekly public show anymore. The violence became more systemic, written into the laws and institutions of the Jim Crow South. After the Civil War, Southern states passed black codes to control the freedoms of newly emancipated people. When these were challenged, they were replaced with Jim Crow laws, which forced racial segregation into every corner of life, separate hospitals, schools, and even cemeteries. And these laws were enforced by the same threat of violence that defined the lynching era. This was also when modern police departments started forming across the country. A key part of their job was enforcing these racist Jim Crow laws, often with the same brutality used by the slave patrols before them. The legal system itself became a weapon. You see, the 13th Amendment had a critical loophole. It abolished slavery except as a punishment for a crime. The loophole was ruthlessly exploited. States started criminalizing black life with vagrancy laws and other petty offenses. Then they leased out convicts, almost all of them black, to corporations for forced labor. This system, known as convict leasing, was just slavery by another name, and one of the reasons why we demand reparations. Keep telling you, little children in adult bodies, since you want to act like you can't comprehend, reparations is about slavery and every cruel, demonic act you forced upon us after slavery. That continues today. Let's go on. The violence was no longer just the mob, it was the state itself. And race riots, white mobs, often aided by police, attacked and destroyed thriving black communities. The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre is one of the most horrific examples, where a prosperous neighborhood known as Black Wall Street was burned to the ground and hundreds were murdered. No white races suffered consequences. The badge as a weapon. As the civil rights movement grew in 1950s and 60s, the battle lines became painfully clear. Images of police turning fire hoses and attack dogs on peaceful protesters in Birmingham showed everyone the role of law enforcement in upholding a racist system. With the fall of Jim Crow, the system adapted once again. The war on drugs and tough on crime policies of the late 20th century became the new tools for racial control. These policies led to mass incarceration, disproportionately targeting black communities with marginalized policing and extreme sentences. The prison population exploded, creating a system that many call the new Jim Crow. Today, that broken line from the slave patrol to the modern police force is visible in the data. The conclusion: the whip, the noose, the badge. 3 symbols separated by time but connected by a single terrifying purpose: the control of black people in America. The story of American murder is a story of adaptation. When one tool of terror became unacceptable, another one simply rose to take its place. The next thing we're going to talk about is theft of Native Black American financial wealth, intellectual property, physical property, and identity. The $1 trillion lie that stole Black America's future. What if the single largest transfer of wealth in American history wasn't a stock market boom or some tech revolution? What if it was a systemic, government-approved theft that started over 150 years ago and is still playing out today? A theft so huge its cost is measured in the trillions. A theft that has shaped the destiny of millions, deciding who gets to build wealth and who is left generations behind. It all starts with a simple, powerful promise made as freedom dawned: 40 acres and a mule. This wasn't just some catchy phrase. It was a real plan for justice, but it became the first and most fundamental lie in a long chain of deceptions that would steal the economic future of Black America. This is the story of that lie and how its fallout created the largest, most hidden wealth transfer in the nation's history. The year is 1865. The Civil War is grinding to its end. 4 million Black Americans are standing on the edge of a new uncertain freedom. They have nothing: no land, no money, no tools, just the brutal memories of slavery and a desperate hope for what's next. In this crucial moment, a historic meeting took place in Savannah, Georgia. A group of ministers, Union General William T. Sherman. I did a video talking about this, how a group of black freedmen got together and the general came and talked to them and asked them what they wanted. They said they wanted acreage. They wanted their own land so that they can live separate from those who enslaved them and oppressed them. They were given 40 acres and a mule. It was a special order. It was called Special Field Order 15. It was radical, revolutionary, and it set aside 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land, along with the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, to be redistributed to newly freed families in 40-acre plots. So we know what happened with it. Our people were given land. They did an exceptional job with it to the point where enslavers were like shocked. The enslaved didn't even take care of the enslavers' land the way they took care of their own. They were prosperous. It was gorgeous. With no land and zero resources, most formerly enslaved people faced a devastating choice: starve or go back to the same damn plantations where they had been enslaved. This time as sharecroppers. Sharecropping was a predatory system designed to trap families in endless cycles of debt. That was the first great theft. The value of that stolen promise is hard to wrap your head around. Historians and economists estimate the value of the land and generational wealth it would have created as worth hundreds of billions, and some estimate putting the total economic impact as high as 640 billion in today's money. I think it's more than that. That's kind of small. But let's go on. Century of theft. The betrayal of 40 acres wasn't a one-off event. It was the start of a A relentless campaign of economic terrorism and legal fraud, all designed to strip Black Americans of any land that they managed to acquire. They built thriving towns, businesses, and schools, but this success made them a target. Wealthy white landowners and officials used every tool they had, from violence and intimidation to shady legal tactics, to steal that land. One of the most destructive traps was the exploitation of heirs' property. Because many Black families didn't trust the racist legal system, they passed down land without formal wills. Over generations, legal ownership became fragmented among dozens of descendants. This created a loophole that speculators and developers exploited with surgical precision. They could find a single distant heir, convince them to sell their small share, and then use that to force the sale of the entire property at auction, often for pennies on the dollar. The USDA has called this a leading cause of Black voluntary land loss. At the same time, the U.S. Department of Agriculture itself was systemically discriminating against Black farmers, denying them the same loans and assistance their white neighbors received. USDA agents would intentionally delay loan approvals until it was too late to plant, forcing Black farmers to take high-interest private loans they couldn't possibly repay, leading to foreclosure. The modern financial machine. So what happened to all the families pushed off of their land? They, along with millions of others, became part of the Great Migration, heading to cities to the north and west looking for a fair shot. But they quickly found that the system of theft hadn't disappeared. It just evolved. The outright plunder of farmland was replaced by the quiet, bureaucratic plunder of the modern financial system. The most powerful weapon in this new era was redlining. Locked out of normal loans, Black families were forced into predatory deals like contract buying. A family would make payments on a home at an inflated price, but they wouldn't buy a single cent of equity. If they missed even one payment, they could be evicted immediately, losing everything they put into it. In Chicago alone, this practice stripped an estimated $3 to $4 billion from Black families in today's dollars. This isn't ancient history. The lines drawn 90 years ago still shape our world. A 2020 analyst found that homeowners in those old redline neighborhoods have gained 52% less in home equity over the last 40 years. That's a loss of over $212,000 per homeowner. A direct result of racist map drawn almost a century ago. The $1 trillion echo. So, what's the final price tag for this century of theft? We see it every day in the modern racial wealth gap. According to the Federal Reserve 2022 data, the median, they just, that's such an ugly number. Just to know, just to keep hearing that white households talking about when you talk about the racial gap, and it's these people love data, and then when they hear that white households have their network is $285,000 compared to the Black households $44,000, and you still keep talking like you don't know there's systemic racism. Now it's not about racism, it's about rich and the poor, right? Okay. Well, what about these rich Black billionaires that often come out and tell you what they experience? Oprah talked about it. Look what happened to Bill Cosby when he tried to buy a TV network. Look what happened to him and his son. So that I'm going to end it. It's, they stole so much from us. They stole, and they continue to steal, and they continue to steal, and they continue to mock, and they continue to play dumb. Like they don't know what reparations is all about. And I was told a long time ago that the reason why a lot of white people are against reparations because they don't want us to have more than them. Well, you know what? Sometimes what you fear overtakes you. And that's what's really going to happen. I've said it numerous times. Either you're going to give it up willingly or it's going to be taken. So what you fear, what you hoard, be prepared to be the most poorest people on the face of the earth. Because there are so many things you could have done to rectify this, and you didn't. All right, folks, I'm out. Thank you for your support. Thank you for all of you guys who listen to this video to the end. Thank you. Thank you for commenting, subscribing, sharing. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.